In this series of videos, we're going to go through the best practices of fusing up a 24 shot heavy duty rack. We always start out first, of course, with safety. You want to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher on hand even while you're fusing things up. You never know when or if something could happen, but you always want to be prepared for that. You also want to make sure that you have a pair of safety glasses. You should never be doing anything with fireworks without a pair of safety glasses on. And also, if you're sensitive at all to chemicals, you'll want a pair of protective gloves to work with. When fusing a fireworks show together, there are three primary methods of connecting your leader fuses to your shell fuses. Those three methods are tape, zip ties, and firework connectors. We're going to look at the pros and cons of using each different method, and then also tips and tricks to how to get the most out of whichever method you choose. No matter what method you choose, we're going to show you why it is absolutely essential to have a good pair of fuse cutters on hand at all times when fusing. So we have our rack loaded up with our canister shells, and before we start fusing these together, the very first thing we want to do is to trim all of the ends of our fuses. So that's where you want to take your fuse cutters and take at about a 30-degree angle, if you can do that, and trim the fuse and expose fresh powder. So just go down in a pattern, trimming each one of your fuses. It'll only take you a few minutes, and it is the number one thing that you can do to ensure that you get an ignition on every one of your shells. Another popular method of fusing fireworks is the zip tie method. The pros of this method are that it's a secure connection in most cases, in that you don't have to worry about something coming along and knocking a fuse loose from your leader fuse. Once they are zip tied in place, they don't move. Another positive aspect of it is that it makes a pretty tight connection between your shell fuse and your leader fuse. A lot of people will just, even if it's cut off square, many people just put their zip ties in. They'll even leave a tail of their shell fuse sticking out. And that's a secure connection. It's not going to pull apart. And then most people will go a half an inch over and go ahead and put a second one. Now, to me, the downsides of doing this is that sometimes these shell fuses will have a good little bit of lacquer on them, and sometimes when you're using a fast fuse such as this, it's going to be burning at a 1/4 second per foot. It is going to go 1 foot in 1/4 of a second, and burning that fast, it can burn past this fuse and not set it off. And so to overcome these possibilities of failure, what I like to do is again, have it cut at an angle, have fresh powder exposed, set these two fuses with that fresh powder. It's a little difficult to do. And pull that zip tie tight right on top of that fresh powder. Go ahead and give it a second one for just security's sake. Trim the ends out of the way. As you can see, this is a very good connection that's probably going to make it through, as opposed to just putting two together with this end not tight with the fuse. Some people will even take it at this point and wrap it with tape just to make absolutely sure. Again, that's maybe it's overkill. They like the zip tie because it holds for strength, and then they like the tape because it contains the fire. To each their own in that respect. For those that like using zip ties, we have got a handy tool for getting a consistent tightness, and it clips it at the same time. Makes for a very nice finished product. This is referred to as a zip tie gun. It's used a lot in the wiring profession when you're doing a lot of home wiring with internet cables and that sort of thing. They zip tie all of those together. Folks use it. It grabs the fuse, pulls it. When it reaches a certain tension that you set down here, it will activate the blade, and the blade comes down and trims your zip tie. Very handy tool, fairly inexpensive. You can find these on our website. So if you're going to zip tie, I strongly suggest you cut your fuses and that you invest in a zip tie gun to make sure that you're getting them as tight as possible every time, and that you won't have any failures due to something that was just not pulled quite tight or has passed by the powder without catching it. So we've got our rack all fused up and ready to go. We've got a good tail to connect to our rest of our show, or a igniter if you're using an electronic ignition system. The last tips, of course, again, are to always trim your fuses. Never use the fuses directly out of the box. They can be contaminated, or just the black powder can fall out of the end of the fuse. Always trim your fuses. Always point your fuses at the oncoming fire as they're coming around. Always make sure that your zip ties, if you're using those, are tight. We recommend our zip tie gun to do that with. It pulls them tighter than you can with your fingers, and it trims them off all in one motion. So we want those tight. And then using fuse connects, always trim the end of your fuse and lay that fuse, the angle cut, on top of the leader fuse in order to make sure that you get a good pass fire on those.